Hi guys, this is Nadia Andreeva from spinachandyoga.com, and today I'm doing an interview with a woman who inspired me so much when I first met her during the Revitalize conference that Mind Body Green hosted. Terry Wahls is the author of Terry Wahls Protocol and is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa and a staff physician at the Iowa City Veterans Affairs Hospital, where she teaches medical students and resident physicians. She also sees patients in traumatic brain injury and therapeutic lifestyle clinics with complex chronic health conditions. And she's also a researcher who conducts clinical trials. But besides that, Terry has an amazing personal story. She's also a patient with a chronic progressive neurological disorder, secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt-reclined wheelchair for 4 years. But thanks to the power of the Wahls Protocol, which is based on the functional medicine and the Wahls Paleo diet, Dr. Wahls restored her health and now pedals her bike 5 miles to work each day. And Terry, you look like I would never, when I first seen you, I would never guess that you had any sort of disease because you're healthy, you're strong. And once I heard your story, it made me want to come and hug you because it was so inspirational. So I'm really, really excited for you to share your story and some of the details.
Sure. So in 2000, I'd started having some problems stumbling, and I went to see my physician and had a complete evaluation. At that time, multiple sclerosis was diagnosed because of a history of optic neuritis or visual dimming 13 years earlier, a new problem with my left leg, lesions in my spinal cord, and abnormal spinal fluid. I knew that within 10 years, 1/3 of those diagnosed with MS will have difficulty walking, needing a cane, walker, or wheelchair, and 1/2 will be unable to work. I had 2 young kids. I was the main breadwinner for our family, so I sought out one of the best MS centers I could find, which was the Cleveland Clinic. And I saw their best people, took the newest drugs. Still, within 3 years, my disease had transitioned to secondary progressive. In that phase of the disease, there's no more spontaneous remissions. You expect a gradual decline. And so I took the recommended chemotherapy. I got the children wheelchair. I even took that miracle drug, Tysabri, but I continued to slowly decline. And it was during that time that I started reading the science for myself. I discovered, actually, I'd been turned on to a paleo diet the year before while I was still walking around. And after 20 years of being a vegetarian, I went back to eating meat. I gave up grains, legumes, dairy, but continued to decline. When I hit the wheelchair, I started reading the animal models and discovered some studies where vitamins and supplements had protected those little mouse brains. I translated those mouse-sized doses to human-sized doses. And I slowed the speed of my decline. I was very grateful, but I was still slowly declining. By the summer of 2007, I was so weak I couldn't sit in a regular chair anymore. I had to sit in a recliner or be in bed. I could walk short distances using 2 walking sticks. Otherwise, I relied on my tilt-recline wheelchair. And that summer, I discovered neuromuscular electrical stimulation of muscles, a technique that athletes have done for years. And I started doing that. I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine, took some of their courses, and had a longer list of vitamins and supplements that would be helpful, added those. And not much was happening, but then I decided I should take that list of vitamins and supplements and get them from the food. So, of course, it was more research to figure out where they were in the food supply. And I reorganized my diet, still following paleo principles, but now is maximizing these vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fats. And that's really when the magic began. Within 3 months, I had my fatigue was gone, my brain fog was gone. In 6 months, I was walking throughout the hospital without a cane. At a year, I was biking again, and in fact had completed an 18-mile bike ride with my family. So this transformed how I thought about disease and health. It transformed how I would practice medicine. And of course, it would ultimately transform the research that I do.
It's just incredible to hear that with so much knowledge, as already trained physician, and following a paleo diet, you still didn't have the results that you wanted, and there was so much perseverance and persistence to keep searching for an answer, which
Right.
it's a whole topic on its own because I feel like so many people give up.
Um, it helped that I was the main breadwinner for our family, so I was like, man, I have to keep at this and figure this out. Um, and the other thing that I want to remind your listeners, many folks think that doing a paleo diet is enough to cure everything.
Yeah.
And it may, if it's more nutrient dense, it may help many diseases, but unless you give people a little more structure on how to organize their diet, many will still find that their autoimmune issues will still be a problem. Their diabetes, heart disease, mental health issues may still be a problem.
So let's talk a little bit in more detail. So
Sure.
would you say that your diet was relatively healthy when you were diagnosed?
Oh, absolutely. People would have thought, I was perfect. I was doing rice, a lot of rice and beans, whole grain breads. I was cooking. There was no fast food. This was all meals prepared at home. I had plenty of vegetables. But it was probably much more carbohydrate based because I had grains and beans, various combinations, and whole wheat breads. So I was probably more in the 6 to 8 servings of a carbohydrate based product every day. But I wasn't eating a lot of sugar, no high fructose corn syrup, no sodas, no candy, no fast food.
So it
And
was
so,
still relatively healthy by
very
most
healthy.
standards.
Yes, by gold standards, by everyone's expectations, it would have been quite healthy. Now, what I didn't do was pay attention to the B12 needs for vegetarians.
Hmm.
So I was probably making myself relatively B12 deficient over time because I was not supplementing with a B complex.
So recognizing that you need to change your diet, especially when you think that your diet is healthy, and when it responds by the understanding by most
Mhm.
research that it's healthy, can be
Yeah.
very difficult. Just
Oh,
acknowledging the fact.
yes, it's very challenging. Changing our health behaviors is difficult. Changing any behavior and sustaining that change uh, is a big commitment.
So a lot of people use their diet as a reward, as a way to self-identify, like I'm a vegetarian or I'm vegan or I'm paleo, as a daily mini celebration. Um, and it's really hard to break that cycle. What did you do to first acknowledge that something had to change and then starting to implement the changes?
It's back in 2002, and I'm still walking around, slowly getting worse. My neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic suggested I visit Dr. Ashton Embry's website, and there I met Lauren Cordain's work. They had many scientific articles, and I sat and read them all, read Cordain's book, and decided the scientific case that he made for going closer to an ancestral diet made sense.
Mhm.
So this was a big, big decision to go back to eating meat, to give up the staples of my diet, the beans and rice, lentils kind of dishes, the breads, and to adopt this eating meat again. And that transition took me several months to slowly wind up the meat and wind down.
Mhm.
Well, actually, it's probably just a couple weeks. But what actually is quite interesting was I stayed with that, though I continued to decline. Um, but at least it gave me something that I felt I was doing in an effort to reclaim my health and slow down my decline.
Okay. Um, when you're moving away from carbs or a larger quality of carbs, even if they're really healthy carbs, in the beginning there are lots of cravings. What did
Yes.
you do to deal with cravings? Because your mind plays tricks on us. It's like, well, it's okay. A little bit is okay. It's not going to
Well,
hurt you.
what's really remarkable is I did this uh, while my family continued to eat a standard American diet. So that was the level of resolve that I had that this is what I need to do. I was the chef in the house, so that helped. I was making the meals. But I knew my kids and spouse still had some, quote, forbidden foods around.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to do this because I read the science, understood the rationale, and it gave me another tool that I could take control of my destiny. And my thinking was it would slow my decline. And I hung in there, but the reason I could hang in there was I read the science and understood and accepted the rationale for those choices.
So that helped with internal dialogue and knowing why you're doing.
You have to know why you're doing it.
Okay. Do you think it's like this for everyone or for people who
Oh,
are more of a logical?
I'd say absolutely everyone. We all do what makes sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the foods that we eat reward our dopamine centers and
Yep.
create more addiction, craving. That's absolutely true. But the choices we make are based on our understanding of our world and reality. So if we change that understanding and I have insights, and so that I see, um, the vegetables are necessary for my brain cells to function, and I really need my brain to work better,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes easier to decide that, well, I may not be familiar with this taste, but I know it's going to help my brain, so I'll keep working at trying new recipes, new ways of preparing the food to make this food work for me.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you started creating the change while still being the chef in the family.
Yes, that was very helpful.
Okay, it's interesting that you say that it was helpful because when I speak to a lot of women, they actually find that cooking two meals for the rest of the family and for themselves over time gets them to go back to their old habits.
Well, I agree. Cooking two meals is a problem.
Hmm.
So I cooked one meal and I served that. Now, my family could still elect to have additional things on the side that I didn't have to prepare. So they might have had their bread on the side, they might have had their dairy that they were continuing to have, and cheese that they could sprinkle on their part of their meals. But the stuff I prepared was always consistent with things that I could eat.
Do
But
you think,
they could, and they would bring additional food to the table that was already pre-prepared.
okay, so they were still in a way eating what you were eating, just adding in something on top.
Right? They ate what I ate, but they also got to eat things that I would never touch.
Did they change their diet after they saw how much of a difference you felt?
No, those little crappers did not. But
Interesting.
I was quite convinced that gluten sensitivity was impacting the health of my family members.
Hmm.
And so I convinced them, which is actually amazing that I was able to do this, to do the Enterolab poop study
Hmm.
looking for antibodies to gluten and dairy in the stool. And so my spouse has significant antibodies. My daughter, like me, has very high antibodies. And my son had mild antibodies. So we got all those results. There was a great gnashing of teeth, wailing and crying, but we purged the house of all the dairy and grains, or at least gluten grains. And what I saw was my daughter's migraines went away, my son's allergies and asthma went away, and my spouse found that her energy and vitality also improved. Now, my son has gone off to college, as has my daughter, and my son no longer follows the diet. He sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. And you can keep a close eye on his forehead. You see the acne sort of come and go. That lets you know how compliant he is. And he tells me it'd be a whole lot easier if he had, acute symptoms. My daughter, if she has gluten, is likely to get a bad headache and migraine. So she stays gluten-free. She has gone back to eating dairy, but she seems to thus far tolerate it. And my spouse and I stay gluten and dairy free.
Um, and that's an interesting question to go about. I, if we are looking at people who are sick, who are going through symptoms that are really, really bothering them, versus healthier people, do you think everyone, even who feels that they feel fine, would benefit from going either on a paleo diet or on Wahls, like
Well,
your own protocol?
so certainly increasing the nutrient density of your diet,
Hmm.
however you do that, will probably have a great favorable impact on energy, mental clarity, mood, and athletic performance. Decreasing your carbs and switching your carbs to carbs from vegetables and a few berries, meat according to appetite, or protein according to appetite, I think will improve the health of probably nearly everyone.
Hmm.
Um, Now, some people have already learned how to select a wonderfully nutrient-dense diet, so they may not notice a big difference. But I think I would probably confidently say 80 to 90% of Americans don't have a maximally nutrient-dense diet and would probably discover more energy, better moods, better attention, better athletic performance.
Yeah.
And they could do it, because my assistant, one of my assistants, is a vegetarian for religious reasons. We did create a version of the Wahls diet that could work as a vegan or vegetarian or as a paleo.
Interesting. That's very.
I would not have done that, but one of my research assistants, whom I treasure, is a vegetarian for
Yeah.
religious reasons, and so I helped her design her diet to address the potential nutrient deficiencies, and then we included that in the book.
That's amazing. So, to give people an example of what it would look like, would you mind sharing what you eat on a daily basis?
Oh, sure. So I'm now in what I call the ketogenic version of my diet, the Wahls Paleo Plus. So in the morning, I'll have a coconut milk a smoothie, and right now I have lots of lettuces coming in, so it's usually one of my lettuces and some spices, perhaps ginger, coconut milk, ice, blend that all up. That's my smoothie.
Hmm.
Then I have, for my protein source, I'll have on hand things like pickled herring, anchovies, sardines.
I love
Uh,
sardines.
yes, quite wonderful. Liver pate, and whatever leftover meat I had from the night before. So I'll have a smoothie, usually a green smoothie, sometimes a berry smoothie, and a protein source. And then I go all day. I'm not hungry, so there's no problem for me. I come home, have supper, and now I'll have a big salad or cooked greens. And then I'll have my sulfur-rich vegetables like cauliflower rice, broccoli rice, fermented cabbage, for example, and then some protein to go with that. Last night we had grass-fed bison, peppers, and spinach in a big skillet meal. And frankly, I make a lot of things in the skillet because it's easier, it's quick. I work all day, I come home, I'm the chef. I want to be eating within, ideally, 20 minutes of starting, certainly never more than half an hour. And then for dessert, and right now my raspberries are coming in. So I have a bowl of fresh raspberries and a tablespoon of full-fat coconut milk on top of that. And then in another week or so, the blueberries will start coming in, and then we'll have aronia berries, we have cherries. We have a very edible landscape here. So we just sort of go from berries to berries to berries every 2 to 4 weeks. It's very fun.
That's amazing, yeah. And you're kind of eating your own ecosystem.
Yes, yes, absolutely. When I first moved here, we brought elderberries from the farm and red and black raspberries. And then as I began to appreciate the healing power of food, we started tucking in kale and collards in with and herbs in with our flowers, and just kept expanding our edible landscape to include, in a very natural way, flowers, perennials, edible herbs, tomatoes,
Hmm.
and now we've added raised bed gardens, and I'm so decadent. I have raised bed gardens that are raised up almost to my waist,
Wow.
and that's been really fun. So I can weed without having to bend over too far.
That's great. My mom has a huge garden where she grows a bunch of stuff, so it's really close to the way I was brought
Yeah.
up. Um, but at the same time, it's so far away for an average American family who has no access to the land per se, maybe besides a small backyard. Um, what you mentioned that you don't have lunch.
Correct. I'm actually quite intentional about that.
Mm-hmm.
Our mitochondria, little power plants in our cells, that will take the energy in the food I eat and convert it to the adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, energy that my cell will use to run all the chemistry of life. It turns out that our mitochondria do better when we have a period of fasting, 12 to 16 hours, and even better if we do 24 hours of fasting or several days of fasting. I personally find 12 to 16 hours of fasting much more comfortable and easy to do than fasting for 24 hours or 96 hours. So that's my choice. And once you get into ketosis or fat burning, eating once a day or twice a day, at least for me and the people in general who follow the ketogenic version of my diet, find it very comfortable, very easy.
So it's like a real yogi. In all ancient yogic books, you
Yeah.
were supposed to eat only 1 or 2 times per day. And in Ayurveda, it always says that we're supposed to give enough time for our body to digest food instead of putting in constant snacking. But at the same time, a lot of modern Western, whether it's trainers or weight loss specialists, will say that you need to eat 5 or 6 meals per day.
Let me comment on that.
Yes, I would love that.
So if you are a sugar burner, so that your mitochondria are always burning starches, carbohydrates, which all get metabolized into sugar, you make a lot of insulin to control that blood sugar level. And so the insulin comes in, the sugar is driven out into your fat cells, by the way. And then you now, because you experience the drop in sugar, you have hunger and craving, so you want to go out and get more carbs. And so that's where the many small meals come from, because you're eating all this carbohydrate, which gets converted to sugar. And it's due to the high insulin levels.
Mm-hmm.
If you eat a diet that's relatively lower in carbs, low glycemic index, so your blood sugar is low and stable, you don't need much insulin, you're not going to be experiencing a lot of hunger, and you have a much more comfortable metabolism. And actually your brain will like that very well. Our brains do extremely well on a fat-burning metabolism.
What do you think if a person does a little experiment and pokes their finger in the morning or during the day to see what their blood sugar levels, what numbers should they look for?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a very interesting study called the CAMPATH study that looked at a hemoglobin A1C and blood glucose. The A1C monitors your glucose over the previous month very nicely. And then they compared your sugar levels and your A1C levels with your brain size and your thinking ability. And what they found is if your A1C is greater than 5.2%, that your brain begins to get smaller and your thinking ability declines. So their conclusion was you want to have an A1C consistently less than 5% or less. Now, most folks will say you're not diabetic until your A1C is over 6% or thereabouts. I think the evidence is coming in that you really would like to have your sugars on the lower side, 60s, 70s, 80s, 85. Certainly hypoglycemia, if it gets dangerously low in the 20s, that can be catastrophic. But in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that is actually very good for us.
That's so interesting because usually people will see until they're like, 113, their doctors doesn't say anything.
They're not going to get too excited. Now, of course, this and there's a big difference between disease state and optimal health.
Yes.
And the diseases are defined with the A1, glucose greater than 125, and so they may not get excited until you're actually in the disease state. But since you're no longer in the optimal health state, I think we'd do much better to get more of our carbohydrates from non-starchy vegetables and berries,
Yeah.
and have those sugars, much closer to that 70, 80s range.
Speaking about carbs in general, especially carbs coming from grains, a lot of people will have a low-grade inflammation in their body pretty much perpetually.
Yes.
What are the first steps that women can take tomorrow, starting tomorrow, to reduce that inflammation, to start balancing their blood sugar levels, and hopefully overcome whatever issues they might be facing? It doesn't have to be a chronic condition, but maybe it's just bloating or foggy thinking.
So I think the very first thing would be to take the gluten grains out of the diet. And some people think that, okay, I'll go gluten-free, but I'm going to have 6 to 10 servings of gluten-free products instead of the gluten-containing products. That will not work out well for the person. So you can have gluten-free, but I'd limit it to just 1 serving a day. So it'd be 1 small piece of bread or a half cup of a gluten-free grain. And then otherwise get your carbohydrates from cabbages, broccoli, onions, mushrooms, rutabagas, turnips, squashes, and then have meat according to your appetite. If you're a vegetarian, I would look for gluten-free grains and legume combinations.
And what do you do with cravings?
Suffer for about 2 weeks, and then things get easier.
Okay. Perfect. So
and if you treat it as an addiction, I talk to my people who are dealing with addictions. You clean out the environment.
Yeah.
So you made the decision, I'm going to go gluten-free, dairy-free. I go through my cupboards, take everything out that has gluten in it, everything out that has dairy in it, and I give it to someone. Now, depending on how you feel, that might be your neighbor, your friends, your kids, the homeless shelter, or the dumpster, depending on what feels morally correct for you. So that your environment at home and at work, there's lots of food that is on the great to have list, and you can't find yourself automatically going to the refrigerator, opening things up, and eating before you realize, wait a minute, I had said I wasn't going to eat any gluten, but here I am having some white Wonder Bread.
So it's like a feng shui of your environment to support your healing process.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's very helpful is to tell your friends, your family, you're going to do this. It may, in my clinics, I pitch to my people with chronic health issues to try a gluten-free, dairy-free diet for 3 months. That they've been suffering for often years or decades. Conventional medicine's not helped. And I make the pitch that do this as an experiment, ideally 3 months, where you'd be meticulously, carefully, 100% gluten-free, dairy-free. You pick the 3 months you're going to do it, and then you decide at the end of the 3 months, I'm feeling good, this is worth continuing, or it wasn't that big of a difference, and you go back to your old ways. I find it just a whole lot easier to have a experiment and a short-term obligation.
And I think the whole life is experiment until you find what really, really works.
Absolutely.
But you have to be a good scientist, an honest scientist, to have good results.
You have to pay attention. And actually to that end, journaling can be extremely helpful. And I talk about that in my book, how useful the journal can be in helping you discover what's going to work for you. Because we're all slightly different.
Yeah. And if somebody wants more guidance and the protocol, do you mind telling about your book and your website?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if you go to my website, Terry, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com, you can sign up, get some free downloads. You certainly want to go pick up my book. It's the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine. This book really details both my personal story, which I think is sort of interesting and fun,
yes,
and a very detailed step-by-step how you transition from your current eating patterns into these steadily healthier, more nutrient-dense patterns. We also talk about things you can do beyond food, meditation, exercise, electrical stimulation of muscles, detoxification. I'm going to back up for the first 3 chapters are in some ways the most important part of the book because they explain the why in a very lay-friendly way so the public can easily understand. But I also have great references and wonderful appendices in the back. So the scientists, the nutrition experts, the registered dietitians, physicians, physical therapists can see the value in the book and use this as a resource to change their practices.
Yeah, amazing. And I do think that having the science behind it, but at the same time being able to understand what you're reading for a person who has no time to look at the research papers is incredibly helpful. So guys, do pick up the book. I'm going to put the link right below the video, along with a link to Terry's website. And there are lots of articles and blog posts. So thank you, Terry, so much for sharing your story.
You're very welcome.
Guys, make sure to watch all other interviews. There are lots of other amazing interviews, and stay in touch and leave your comments if you have any questions. Bye.